What if I told you that a man survived 4 winters sleeping in a tent, surrounded by snow, hunger, and oblivion, and today he races through the streets of Manhattan in a black Lamborghini, its engine roaring louder than the voices that once ignored him? Robert was 50 when fate decided to test him in the most unrelenting way. New York, the city that never sleeps, but also the city that doesn't see. Amid the skyscrapers and the rush of people, he became invisible, a shadow on the frozen winter sidewalks. It wasn't always like that. Before, Robert was just an ordinary worker, with an average job, bills to pay, and dreams shelved like most people. But when he lost his job and soon after his apartment, everything crumbled. The fall was quiet. No fanfare, no one to catch him. The first night on the street was the hardest, not because of the cold, but because of the shame, the weight of admitting, I don't have a place to live anymore. Sleeping in a makeshift tent in Central Park wasn't a choice. It was what remained. Every gust of wind felt like a slap from the world. Every averted glance from passers-by, a stab of rejection. But there was something in Robert that no one saw. Small, nearly extinguished fire, but still there, a spark of faith. He never told anyone, but every night before closing his eyes, he made a silent promise. One day, this will change. For the 4 years he lived there, he never begged for money. Just time to figure out where he went wrong. Time to rebuild himself. He clung to any book he found abandoned, studying with eyes hungry for answers, listening to strangers' conversations as if they were lectures, and mentally noting everything. Robert wasn't just a homeless man. He was a mind trapped in a weary body, waiting for the right chance. If you've made it this far, it's because you believe transformation is possible. So take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Leave a like, because this story, it'll make you see life through different eyes. During the first winter, Robert discovered that the cold wasn't the worst enemy. It was indifference. The way people's eyes passed over him as if he didn't exist. No name, no story, no past. He was just another dirty face, unshaven, in tattered clothes, with a backpack carrying the last scraps of his dignity. He dragged himself along Manhattan's wet sidewalks, trying to keep some routine, even if that routine was just surviving another day. Fear became routine. Fear of being attacked, robbed, or chased away from wherever he tried to sleep. But even more terrifying was the fear of losing himself. Robert lost weight, a lot. Hunger was a constant presence. Some nights he lay down hugging his own stomach, trying to trick the pain with positive thoughts. It'll pass. But it didn't. A bag of spoiled potatoes tossed behind a restaurant was what he called a feast one night. He cried as he ate. Not for the food, but for realizing how low he'd sunk. And even so, he gave thanks. Always gave thanks. Because to him, gratitude was the one thing the world couldn't take away. The loneliness was sharp. Friends vanished. Family, there was none. He was a man alone in a city of 8 million people. It was like shouting into a hurricane. No one heard. No one stopped. Only a stray dog, whom he nicknamed Max, seemed to notice his pain. Max showed up one night trembling, skinny, and curled up at Robert's feet as if to say, I've been forgotten too. They slept together for weeks, sharing warmth, scraps, and silence. Max's presence saved Robert from the unthinkable, from giving up entirely, from snuffing out that last flame. The nights were long. Robert would stare at the lights of luxury, buildings, and wonder, does anyone up there realize there's a man freezing down here? He imagined stories, saw himself in a suit at a meeting table closing deals. He created dialogues in his mind, as if training for a future that might never come. Because even at rock bottom, he still dreamed. But the city kept spinning, and he remained forgotten. Every day was a battle against his own mind, against the idea that all was lost. And yes, there were moments when he thought about ending it all. But there was always a voice, a memory, something saying, one more day, just one more. And so he went on, day after day. 4 winters. 4 years of pain, rejection, and soul-cutting cold. But something was about to change. Because rock bottom is also where you find the push to rise. It was on a gray morning, with snow blanketing the sidewalks and silence weighing heavier than the cold, that Robert heard the words that would change everything. He was huddled near a coffee shop on the Upper West Side, trying to warm his hands with his own breath, when a middle-aged woman, well-dressed, hurried out with a coffee in hand. She looked at him for a few seconds, then said without stopping, You're still here. A mind like yours shouldn't be on this ground. She didn't stop, didn't wait for a reply. But those words, they stuck, like a beat echoing in his chest, as if someone had given him back the right to believe he was still somebody. A mind like yours. How did she know? They'd never spoken. Or had they in another time when Robert still had a name, a tie, and ambitions? It didn't matter. It ignited something inside him. Not a loud hope, but a whispered certainty. I'm still here. That same day, Robert decided to change something simple. He washed his face in a public fountain, took a piece of cardboard and wrote with a pen, "Looking for work." I read, write, think. He stood beside the sign. He didn't ask for handouts. He asked for a chance. Most people still walked by, but now he was trying. It was the first conscious step out, and that was already a rebirth. 2 days later, a man stopped. He owned a used book fair in Brooklyn. He read the sign and asked, "Can you organize titles by author and date?" Robert replied, "Give me a chance and I'll show you I can do better than that." The man laughed, intrigued, and gave him a simple opportunity. Pack books and organize boxes for 3 days. He'd pay in cash. Robert accepted without hesitation. That night he cried, but this time the tears were different. Not pain. Relief. The weight of starting to climb out. The 3 days turned into a week. Then a month. Robert still slept on the street, but now with a goal. The fair's owner noticed he had something more. A sharp eye, a quiet intelligence. He began trusting him with bigger tasks. Basic accounting, inventory calculations, strategies to sell more, and Robert did it all with precision. Even in tattered clothes, he stayed focused. He studied economics and management books that turned up in the fair's boxes, read at night under streetlights while Max slept beside him. It was as if his brain, starved for years, was finally being fed. And with it, his identity was returning. The turning point didn't come with applause. It came with silence, with discipline, with small actions. But there, in that unlikely setting, Robert was planting his future, because when all seemed lost, a single sentence reminded him who he was, and now he had no intention of forgetting. Everyone sees the Lamborghini, but no one sees the sleepless nights, the days of rejection, the aching body after carrying heavy boxes, the constant fear of it all collapsing again. When Robert decided he'd never return to the tent, he had nothing but a decision. No plan, no safety net. Just him, Max, and a desperate will to make life worth living again. He used his first paycheck from the fair to rent a room in a workers' hostel. It was small, moldy, with a bed that creaked at every move. But to Robert, it was a castle. The routine was brutal. Up at 5 a.m., walking miles to the fair, setting up stalls, serving customers, and returning at night to study. He picked up forgotten books from the stall. Read about business, marketing, personal development. Watched motivational videos on borrowed phones. Everything he absorbed, he tested in practice. He began suggesting changes to the fair's sales, thematic organization, flash promotions, partnerships with local coffee shops. The owner was impressed. In 6 months, sales doubled, but Robert didn't want to be an employee forever. He wanted freedom. He wanted to create. So he started selling books on his own in his spare time, bought titles for pennies, resold them for profit, built a delivery system with an old bike. And even with the falls, the no's, the fear, he didn't stop. When he saved his first $2,000, he invested in an online course on e-commerce digital sales. He spent sleepless nights learning about sales funnels, SEO, copywriting. It was like going back to college, except now the motivation was life or death. And it was in that digital world that he saw a new path. He created his first online store for rare and collectible books. He didn't know if it would work, but he had to try. The first few months were tough. 0 sales. But he kept tweaking, learning from every mistake. The first order came from a customer in California. Robert packed it with such care it was like sending a jewel. The 5-star review he received was taped to the hostel wall. It was just one sentence, impeccable service. But to him, it was proof the dream was working. Over time, orders grew. He reinvested everything, bought a domain, hired freelancers to improve the design, built a social media presence. In 2 years, the store made enough for him to rent his first apartment. Small, modest, but with a door, hot shower, and dignity. Every achievement was soaked in tears, not of sadness, but of gratitude. He knew what it was to live with nothing. And now everything had value. The glass of clean water, the made bed, the sound of the stove's burner. Every detail was a reminder. He'd won another day. Robert understood that freedom isn't given. It's earned with sweat, courage, and a clear goal. And he was just getting started. 3 years after that morning when he heard, "A mind like yours shouldn't be on this ground," Robert crossed the Brooklyn Bridge driving his first car, a used sedan, bought in cash with the profits from an e-commerce business now serving international orders. But what no one saw was that the real engine wasn't under the hood. It was inside him. It was the strength of someone who'd known nothing and refused to go back. It was at an entrepreneur's convention in New Jersey that Robert's life shifted to a new level. He was invited to speak after a video of his comeback story went viral. The audience gave him a standing ovation. People who'd never lived on the streets cried hearing about the man who overcame cold, hunger and loneliness without ever giving up on his dreams. There a new door opened. Mentorships, invitations, partnerships. With his revenue growing, he decided to diversify. He launched a second company, a startup curating and selling rare luxury edition books. The niche was small, but the market was high value. He used everything he'd learned on the streets to negotiate, smartly listening more than he spoke, observing before acting. Within months, he closed deals with collectors and museums. His brand became synonymous with quality. The press discovered his story, and soon Robert was on magazine covers, not as an ex-homeless man, but as an example of entrepreneurial resilience. It was at a charity auction in Manhattan that he saw the car of his dreams, a black Lamborghini Huracan, flawless, a symbol of everything that once seemed out of reach. He didn't hesitate. He placed the winning bid, not for show but for meaning. When he turned the key and heard the engine roar, Robert didn't hear speed. He heard every freezing night, every no, every step to get there. With his success, he could have lived a quiet, comfortable life. But he chose differently. He founded a nonprofit named after Max, his loyal companion, to help people on the streets start over. The project offers shelter, digital training, and access to mentors. "If I can turn one pain into a bridge, then it was all worth it," he said in an interview. His mother, whom he hadn't seen in over 20 years, reappeared after seeing a TV report. Their reunion was emotional. She barely recognized him. "You made it, son. You came back," she said, tears in her eyes. Robert didn't reply. He just hugged her, hard, as if giving back to the world what it had once taken from him. Robert doesn't forget the tent, or the sleepless nights. He kept it stored, a relic. Sometimes he sets it up in his backyard to remember where he came from, to remind himself that every pain can become a bridge, if you're brave enough to cross it. Now 50, Robert lives in a house he helped design, with wide windows and a view of the horizon where the sky meets the city that once ignored him. There's no excessive luxury, no ostentation, there's purpose. On every wall a photo, in every piece of furniture a story. But the most precious item sits in a glass case in the center of his office, the cardboard sign where, years ago, he wrote, "Looking for work." I read, write, think. He keeps it there not for nostalgia, but for truth. To never forget that it was exactly at that moment that everything began to change. Today, Robert runs 3 companies, employs over 60 people, and most importantly, gives back what life gave him. The Max Foundation has lifted over 300 people off the streets, not with handouts, but with opportunity. Robert believes no one is invisible, just temporarily unseen. He visits the shelters himself, listens to stories, offers a hand, because he knows. He's been there, he's felt the pain, and he knows no one needs a miracle. They need a chance. In his talks around the world, he always repeats the same line. You don't choose where you start, but you can choose how far you go. At one of those talks, a young woman asked, "What was the moment you felt you'd won?" Robert smiled, thought for a moment, and answered, "It wasn't when I bought my car, or when I made my first million. It was when I walked into my first room and could lock the door behind me." Freedom starts with safety, and I never wanted to sleep afraid again. Robert's legacy isn't in the possessions, the contracts, or the headlines. It's in the quiet hope he plants in every story that crosses his. It's in the eyes of people who now have a roof, a bed, a dream, and more than that, a vision. That yes, it's possible. That even the most forgotten, if they lift their head, can turn their pain into fuel. And if you've made it this far, it's not by chance. Robert's story isn't just about him, it's about you. About everyone who's ever thought of giving up. About those who think it's too late. It's never impossible. Life changes, and it always starts with a quiet decision. And before this video ends, remember one thing. The story you write now could be someone's inspiration tomorrow. If this story touched you in some way, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. Not for me, but for all the stories still worth telling. Because everyone has a rock bottom, but only some choose to build a ladder. And you, when will you start?